And joining us now are the co-creators of Breaking the Case, Edward Conlon, welcome, thank you, and Jill Bowerly, thank you so much for being here. This is up my alley. Podcasts are fantastic. You learn so much. What appealed to you, first Jill, as a storyteller, to get involved in this project?
For me, it was going in depth in these stories. A lot of times, we don't get to take the time to really hear from each individual officer their experience. And I love how we can show all the working parts of NYPD working together to fight crime.
Edward, in your position as a former detective and when you're interviewing officers to put together one of these, do you think that gives an edge rather than an outsider, a journalist?
I think so. I think cops are more comfortable talking to cops. And just, you know, a lot of these interviews we did in people's houses and just setting up a microphone and having them tell a story is different from putting a camera in front of someone.
It's a conversation.
It is, it is.
It's a conversation. And what's important to note is because we were watching a story, we were seeing the video, but again, this is the podcast, the intimacy. You're hearing it, right? I mean, that's what especially it makes it so important, how the use of sound and the use of sound bites and music. Jill, tell us about the Baby Hope, as we saw, solved case. There are unsolved cold cases. Monique is one of the ones that's coming up. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, well, the detectives on the case were looking to get some help from the public, which is why we chose this as a podcast.
Ah, okay.
In 2015, in a park called Calvert-Vaux Park in South Brooklyn, some severed body parts were found. It was discovered that these were a woman. They did not have her skull, so they couldn't really reconstruct her face and put a poster out there, but they did get some DNA. They got her fingerprints, and they're still looking for her identity. They were able to reverse engineer her DNA to kind of predict what she might have looked like, but it's just an image. So that's where they are. And so the podcast follows the whole investigation, all the dead ends, all the near misses, and we learn about the case in depth, and we ask for tips from the public.
And you just never know, right? Just one word, one sentence can just turn it, right? Right, Edward?
For 22 years, this Baby Hope was a very cold case, and once they found out her name, which came from the public, a tip, I didn't know her name, but a tip led to her identification, and then 8 days later, the man who killed her was under arrest. So it shows you how much work goes into getting the point where you can be as lucky as we ultimately were.
I remember that when that news broke. It was incredible. The Larry Davis case is going to be another podcast. Tell me about that.
Jill?
Jill?
Sure. Well, 19 years, do I have it right? Back in 1986, around this week, some officers were going to an apartment to arrest a man named Larry Davis. For the alleged murder of 11 people. And there was a shootout, and 6 officers were shot. So we go back in time. Enough time has passed, we can sort of look back at it with some objectivity. And we just talked to some of the officers who have never really spoken about this before publicly. And we talk about New York City then versus New York City now.
And that evokes some responses that help to piece some things together and elicit new information?
Yes. Yeah.
When you're hearing it, I mean, as you know, there are so many different, the podcasts, all the TV police shows, the integrity which Jessica talked about in her story of holding on to the integrity, obviously representing the NYPD, but as storytellers, there's so much noise out there. How do you challenge yourself as a writer and a producer on this, and using your voice as well, Ed?
Well, one of the things that was a surprise to me, and it's not a surprise, I grew up in New York City, but one of the things that I had a much deeper appreciation for was just how bad things were. Baby Hope was homicide number 79 just for that precinct, just for that year. So by July, 79 people had been murdered in the 3-4 precinct. It would go on to 122. Now we have less than 300 murders a year. It just gives you a sense of appreciation for how much work has gone into making the city as safe as it is today.
When you're in the booth And I mean, this is tapping a different talent of yours as a communicator, as a reader. Tell me about that when you're talking about these real people. What does that feel like?
It's a different kind of writing. You know, it's not writing like a newspaper story, or it's making a conversation. Sometimes with everybody, sometimes with the person you're talking to. It's interesting. It's much more slow and intimate, a way of connecting with people.
The Police Foundation is very much a part of this. Jill, can you tell us about that?
Well, sure. When we originally were thinking of doing this, we needed some support. We needed a little bit of equipment, and the Police Foundation agreed to support us, and in return, we run public service announcements for their group.
So that's helpful as
Yes.
well. What do you want the public to get out of these podcasts, Breaking the Case?
Just to listen to what goes into solving crimes and understanding the human dimension of the men and women who do solve them, and to always try and think of a way you can help. It's public. In the Baby Hope case, Monique to come, these cases are only going to be solved when people tell us what happened.
So every Tuesday a new one comes out, correct?
Yes.
Every Tuesday. All right. So this week's is the Baby Hope, or this week's is Monique, or where are we on?
We just released episode 4, Baby Hope.
Okay.
We're actually
okay.
going to take a break for
Okay.
Thanksgiving and then come back
And
with
get
the rest of
into it.
Baby Hope and Monique, and then take another break before Larry Davis.
Thank you
in January.
so much. It's just fascinating to hear about this and to hear another side of the work, and hopefully get some of these other cases solved. Thank you, Jill Bowerly.
Thank you.
Edward Conlon, thank you for being
Thank you.
here. For more information on the Break in the Case podcast, head to our website, cbsnewyork.com.